My name is Des Charles. My age I tell no woman. No, my age is 67. I was born in Burnie, Tasmania, and I've lived now in Binnalong Bay for about the last 7 years. It's strange growing up in Burnie. I was right near the sea, so as long as I can ever remember, the sea was very much part of my life. So were the lakes in the Central Highlands of Tassie too, but it seemed that because, as I said, Burnie, we lived about probably 10 kilometres from the beach, and it started to play a big role in my life in the very early stages, fishing, and of course going down to the beach in those days. I can remember the Burnie Wharf being very much part of my younger days in fishing, where the cooter used to run on the Burnie Wharf, and they were lined up. The Burnie Wharf was probably lined up with maybe up to 50 people along the wharf, all with floats chasing cooter. And of course, when the cooter run was finished, there was the trevally run on the wharf, and those things were sort of a religious thing in Burnie. It was a thing that happened, and as soon as it did, the news went out all over town, and people just flocked to that area. Of course, that doesn't happen anymore. You can't go back to that. You can't fish on the Burnie Wharf anymore. That's all closed now, and so it's a bit sad that those types of days have gone. Well, I suppose one of the highlights of the place happened a couple of years ago when Lonely Planet gave it the second best beach destination in the world. I mean, to a local, I suppose that's something that, hey, how does that happen? But experts braver than me gave it that title, and with that came a lot of tourists, a lot of people. It recognised the place all of a sudden as being a tiny little sleepy seaport to a place now. And if you look around the all the beaches around here, you'll see the caravans here in the summertime by heaps and heaps of numbers. Binnalong Bay is a very, very special place. It's a little niche that's left on one of the coastal fringes of Tasmania. There's not a lot of these places left where you can still just go out and dive or fish for a crayfish not 50 metres away from the boat ramp, where you can still go and get a feed of abalone if you want it, and you can still go to one of our reef spots. We've got a few reefs around the area, catch a reef fish, or for that matter go on the sand and still get yourself one of those bread and butter fish like flathead. Binnalong Bay, as I said, is very special, especially in a lot of other reasons. Most times of the year, give it 10 months of the year, you can come down to the boat ramp and you'll be one of probably 6 or 8 people vying to put their boat in to go fishing. That doesn't happen in very many places. I had 28 years in Queensland. I remember the boat ramps there, we used to have to queue up, and I mean queue up with 50 and 60 other trailers to put your boat in. We've got a little thing here in Binnalong Bay. When Christmas time comes, usually the locals pull their boats out of the water, they pull their craypots out of the water, and we let the locals have it, simply because, look, we've got it for the other 10 months of the year, so why should we battle with another 36 boats and trailers at the boat ramp queuing up to try and put our boats in? So we've got it to ourselves. It's our little niche of the world, and we only share it with a few other people in the other couple of months. Like, change in life is something that's always going to happen. It's something we can't stop. It's probably how fast that change occurs, and change has happened here at Binnalong Bay since the day there was a gate on the road where you had to lock and key on it, seemingly a long time before I came here, and you had to know where the key was to even get into the place. So there's been a lot of changes in Binnalong Bay, and I guess in the future there'll be a lot more. It's what we do with that change and how we manage that change, how we manage the fishery, whether we continue to lower the bag limits or look at the different species that we've got in the water so that we can manage them, so that I can sit on the seat down here when I'm 87, not 67, with someone that I've fished with here all my life and say, look, here comes Joe Blow on a boat and he's still got to feed a flathead. We need to be able to keep that. We don't want to end up like places like Canada where species are totally gone, and even in some parts of Australia when we've fished them out and now those species are no longer. Yeah, well, it's its whole bracket. It starts off with the professionals, and it starts off with the amateur fishermen too. We've all got to work together for one goal, and that's to make sure, as I said before, that the fishery is sustainable right through. We as individuals have got to look at our fishery so that we maintain it in such a way that we don't say, hey, we're here for the short time, we're here for the long time. We don't want to say, hey, because the flathead are running, we could go and take our bag limit of 30 today, because tomorrow they might not be there. We need to go out and say, hey, let's take a feed of flathead. Let's have them fresh, and then in 2 weeks' time go and get another feed of fresh flathead. Why would you go and get 30 or 40 flathead, freeze them, and then 6 months later trying to find them in the bottom of the freezer? It's all about being able to go out on the day when you want to and catch a fish or a crayfish or whatever it is and have it fresh. It's funny about a good day's fishing and how that's changed over the years. I remember when I was a wee lad, my father and I used to go down to Rocky Cape, which is a place on the northwest coast. Now the fish we'd target would be fish like cooter, wrasse. They were the bread and butter fish. When you went to the fish and chip shop and you ordered some fish and chips, you got a piece of cooter and chips. That was the done thing, or it might have been a bit of flake. Times have changed heaps and heaps. Now wrasse is something that the locals don't even bother catching. It's a fish that's probably 2 out of 10. It's now targeted by the professional people who actually catch it alive and send it to places like Asia and those places where it's put in tanks alive and becomes a very, very expensive type of fish. So now we look at our fish and chip and we find that it's an imported fish from somewhere. It's not a local fish anymore, and we've changed our ways. Fishermen now, we wouldn't, if we caught a wrasse, it'd either go back or it'd probably go for craybait. It would certainly wouldn't be taken home and eaten. So now we target other fish like flathead and other fish that have come here, even since I've been here in the last 7 years, fish that didn't occur in our coastal waters of Tasmania. We have now fish like tailor, we have fish like snapper, we have fish like whiting, we have fish like kingfish that didn't appear here 10 years ago. All now starting to come down. Call it global warming, call it whatever you like, but the fishery is definitely changing. Maybe we'll have snapper, red emperor and all those fish here in 10 years, who knows. I guess from being a knee-hider or grasshopper to a 67-year-old, I've seen a huge change in lifestyles and fishing styles. I think probably what's happened over that period, we've got smarter as fishermen too. I remember, you know, back in the days we fished at Rocky Cape and around Burnie, it was an old green piece of cord with a couple of big lumps of red meat on the end, and that was the basic fishing rod. That's what you went out to fish with. The other ways we used to fish, we used to actually go down and camp at Rocky Cape, and the way we used to catch the garfish and some of the fish was quite unique, and you don't see that much around our coastline anymore. And that was building fish traps, and we used to build the rocks around a little bay, pile them high, tide used to come in, tide would go out, then we'd wade through the water where the rocks would stop and there would be garfish, so we'd pick the garfish up and we had fish for tea. Of course that's not done anymore today. Today we're into a scientific age in fishing, an age where really the fish probably hasn't got a chance. That's why we've got to look at what we're doing, because we're smarter, we're catching more fish. Soft plastics are now a thing that we target fish with. We use scents now that certainly wasn't used when I was a kid. As a matter of fact, soft plastic was probably never heard of. And because of all these new inventions on how to catch fish, we're catching more fish. We're able to go out and catch nearly our bag limits in most species. So with that in mind, we don't want to get in front of the fish. We want the fish to stay with us. So as we move on, we've still got fish to move on and catch. Something like that. Yeah, as this old world evolves, of course, we as human beings populate, and we're becoming to the extent where we're able to have more boats, we have more money, we have more pastime, we're getting older like me, we're living older. So as you retire, naturally, if you've been a part-time fisherman in your life, when you start to retire, you become a full-time fisherman. So with that in mind, I probably go out and fish twice a week. Multiply that, multiply the fact that you know, tourism and is promoted very heavy in Tasmania. Look along any of our beaches along here and just have a look at how many caravans there are there. Now, every one of those caravans, every person in that caravan would have a surf rod. So part of the camping thing is to sit on the beach and hopefully catch a salmon. And that's lovely because that brings tourism to Tasmania, it brings money and helps us, the economy in Tasmania. Of course, now boats we have boat building industry right here in St Helens. Most people that live along the shoreline has a boat. Motors are bigger, motors are stronger, we can go wider and wider. The pressure on fishing, of course, is a lot more than what it used to be. You know, going back when I was a kid, oh crikey, what an old boat like the one behind me, only a lot smaller, built in yew and pine with an old British Seagull motor. That was a boat, and if you had one of those, mate, you were in heaven. And probably one out of every suburb had one of those, and that was it. So yeah, pressure upon us in lots of different facets. Of course, there's water temperature now and climate problems. There's introduced species like Cetra stephanus that does naturally occur and certainly affects our fishing. So we've really seriously got to look at a whole picture, not just one picture. It's a big bracket we've got to have a look at. The natural thing, what humans do, and that plays a big part on what our fishery is going to be in the future. As a community, especially little communities like Binnalong Bay, and there's lots of little communities like that around Tasmania, we as a whole, actually this community is very good at what it does in fishing. Most of the people that fish here and live here understand they live here for one reason. They live here naturally for our beaches and our wonderful coastline, but also the fishermen know that part and parcel of why they come here in the first place was because the fishing is very good. They're not silly. So they're not silly about the fish that live in the sea either. They know that if they overfish this, then somewhere down the line, either their sons, grandsons or whatever are going to lose what Binnalong Bay and other little communities like Binnalong Bay are. I know if a trawler comes close to this coastline of a night, this little community will be up in arms about it. It'll be through this community like wildfire that a boat is coming close and it's probably working out of its jurisdiction, and that's actually happened sometimes in some cases here. Just recently I done a survey with the University of Tasmania only a few days ago, where we actually went out and tagged flathead, simply because that's one of the species we don't really know where they go, how they operate as far as their spawning is concerned, and we really want to know and monitor fish. Now flathead are just one small part of the fish. The rock, Elephant Rock, has been closed for quite some time, and a lot of crayfish have been put there by the government here in Tasmania, or fisheries here, to try and see where the big cray, sorry, we can get at that, 750 big crays were released there to see whether or not they would eat the Cetra stephanus. Now that may be a waste of time, it may not be a waste of time, but at least we're looking at trying to introduce something that may just help that environment and rid ourselves, or help rid ourselves of those pests. So again, it's a big picture. It's monitoring, apart from fishing and just doing apart from monitoring and just making sure that we stay within the bag limits. It's also another picture where we've got to monitor fish by tagging them, looking at where they come from or where they go to, so that in the future we can decide whether or not that fishery needs to be closed, left open, or whatever. I think the easiest way to explain that is if I go back and tell you where I was born, and that was Burnie. That was right on the coastline. In the 70s I decided to move to Queensland, and when I got to Queensland I wanted to live near the coastline because that's what Queensland offers. So I picked an island out in Moreton Bay, which was about a mile long and about 500 yards wide. And I thought to myself, this is heaven. And I've taken heaven to the next spot. So from there, it just evolved. Now, when I decided to come back and live in Tasmania, my wife and I had a look around Tasmania and decided that there was only one place. There was only one place to come and live in, and that was Binnalong Bay. And I've explained exactly why. It has everything I can possibly want it as a 67-year-old. I don't need to move from this place. As a matter of fact, just recently we thought about moving. And we sat down, my wife and I said to her, look, you write down on a piece of paper the reasons why you want to move, and I'll write down on a piece of paper why I want to move. Now, we took half an hour. And after half an hour, I turned to her and I said, what have you written? She said, absolutely nothing. She said, what have you written? I said, the only thing I miss is to be able to go to some live shows. So when we looked at one another, we said, what are we even thinking about moving for? This is heaven.